The Curse of Oak Island team has just uncovered a hidden vault, and it changes everything. Deep in the northern swamp, the team breaks open a sealed stone chamber that has been sitting submerged for centuries. What comes out of it stops everyone in their tracks. A wrought iron crank handle, a hook, and a pipe, all dated to the late 1700s. Before any documented person ever set foot on that section of the island, someone constructed this structure, concealed objects inside it, submerged it beneath the swamp, and disappeared entirely from the record. My first impression is that these are obviously deliberately stacked pieces of slate with some brick outlining the top. Very unusual looking, but very well made, and nobody across more than 230 years of searching ever located it until now. When you combine this vault with what sonar just revealed 140 feet underground in the Money Pit, it raises a question no one on this island has ever been able to answer. Who was truly here, and what did they leave behind? The discovery nobody saw coming. It begins with a stone pathway. The excavation in the northern swamp is supposed to be routine. The team is working through the upper swamp layer when the stones start appearing, not scattered randomly, not deposited by chance, but deliberately arranged in a structured pattern that moves in a clear and specific direction across the swamp floor. The consistency is what immediately catches Ian Spooner's attention. Spooner is the team's geoscientist, and he draws his conclusions from what he directly observes in the soil, rock, and distribution of material. His assessment is precise. A natural deposit of stones in a swamp environment arrives in varying sizes with no consistent spacing and no directional logic. What the team is looking at has none of those characteristics. The stones are similar in size, laid close together, and they lead somewhere with clear intention. Nature does not arrange stones this way. People do. It's almost like they're stacked. That's a Spooner question. Yeah, that's a Spooner question. The pathway leads directly to something far more significant. Just beyond the end of the stone arrangement, partially buried in the swamp floor, sits a small rectangular structure built from precisely placed rock, sealed tight and hidden completely beneath the waterlogged surface. It is not a well. It is not a drainage feature. It is a vault. Gary Drayton, the team's metal detection specialist, has spent years pulling targets out of swamps and fields all across Oak Island. He goes into this particular excavation with no special expectations. Nothing about the northern swamp suggested anything out of the ordinary. What he discovers instead is a square, vault-shaped feature submerged in the mud with no clear explanation for why it exists or what it once contained. The slate used to construct the vault is precisely cut. Not rough field stone, not debris that drifted into the swamp over time. Tom Nolan, who has walked this property his entire life and knows every feature his father Fred documented across decades of searching, examines it and is visibly taken aback. Nothing on this island looks like this. The two wells previously identified on the Graves property are already accounted for. This is something else entirely. In Tom Nolan's view, the structure has only one logical purpose. It was built to contain something and built to keep that something hidden. This corner of the swamp sits on what was once Anthony Graves' land. The structure is sealed. Its purpose is unknown. I don't know what to say. Yeah. I've never seen anything like this. MHM. I mean, look at that slate. It's perfectly cut. Yeah. The central question is this: who builds a sealed stone vault in a swamp? And what was inside it before the water moved in? Anthony Graves and the silver coins. The name that keeps resurfacing, the one that connects everything in this corner of the island, is Anthony Graves. In 1857, Graves purchases the majority of Oak Island and builds his home just north of the swamp. He is not a treasure hunter. He does not dig shafts or chase leads in the Money Pit. By most records, he is a farmer, practical, quiet, and unremarkable. But a persistent rumor has followed his name for more than a century, that somewhere on his property, Graves stumbles upon a large cache of Spanish silver coins. He never confirms this publicly. What he does do, however, is use Spanish coin as his routine currency in local commerce. In a time and place where Spanish silver is exotic and uncommon, that detail carries real weight. Spanish coinage in 19th century Nova Scotia is not pocket change. It is a deliberate choice of currency, the kind of choice a man makes when he has more of something than he needs and does not want too many people asking where it came from. The vault sits directly on Graves' land. The swamp is Graves' backyard. Alex Lagina and Tom Nolan assess the situation, and the decision is straightforward, with lead archaeologist Laird Niven defining the parameters. The team excavates all the way down to the bottom of whatever this structure holds. The handle, the hook, and the pipe. Gary Drayton runs his metal detector across the interior of the vault. The signal is strong and immediate. Iron, a significant piece of it, sitting somewhere in the mud below the waterline. He works toward it carefully. When he finally gets a grip on the object and pulls it free, the reaction from everyone watching is instant and unfiltered. Nobody standing at the edge of that excavation has any idea what they're looking at. The object has something attached to it, what appears to be a piece of brick. It has clearly been sitting in that position for a very long time. Lead archaeologist Laird Niven identifies it quickly as some kind of pipe. But the pipe is not the most significant object pulled from that vault. The excavation continues and two more objects emerge from the interior. The first is a handle, wrought iron, with wood grain-like structures running visibly through the metal, which is the characteristic signature of iron worked before modern industrial production methods existed. Rick Lagina examines it closely, turning it over carefully in his hands. His conclusion, stated plainly after a long look, is that it is a handle from a chest. The second object is a hook, also wrought iron, recovered from deeper within the vault. 3 iron objects in total, a pipe, a crank handle, and a hook, all pulled from inside a sealed stone structure in the northern swamp, on what was once Anthony Graves' land. It's a very hard bottom. What is that? Let's see. Well, that's odd. The most telling detail about the crank handle is what it implies. A crank mechanism is not a passive storage item. It is a working component designed to operate something, to open or close a lid, a hatch, or a locking mechanism under load. Something mechanical was either functioning inside this vault or specifically designed to function here. The vault was not simply a container. It was an active system. And whoever built it understood precisely what they were constructing. The lab changes the timeline. The following afternoon, Rick Lagina, Craig Tester, Laird Niven, and archaeologist Emma Culligan gather in the Oak Island laboratory with all 3 artifacts laid out for examination. The objective is straightforward. Identify what each object is, what it was used for, and when it was made. Emma begins with the handle. Under CT imaging, the wrought iron grain structure is unmistakable. The characteristic layered, fibrous pattern of ironwork before modern steel production is clearly visible in the scan. The square hole at the center of the piece is the detail that draws the most attention. Laird Niven's response is immediate. The square drive hole means the handle was designed to move something else. It is a crank mechanism built to operate a lid, a hatch, or a chest. Not decorative, purely functional. Craig Tester reaches the same conclusion independently. Then Emma gets to the metallurgical dating, and the findings shift everything. She examines the hook first. It carries a slight manganese content, which allows her to narrow the date range with confidence. Her assessment places it in the early to mid-1800s, consistent with Anthony Graves' documented time on the property. Graves lives on the island from 1857 until his death in 1888. The hook falls comfortably within that window and could plausibly be connected to Graves directly. The pipe and the crank handle are an entirely different matter. Laird Niven delivers the finding plainly. The pipe and the crank handle date definitively to the late 1700s. That is before Anthony Graves, before any recorded occupant of that particular section of Oak Island. The artifacts recovered from inside the vault predate the earliest documented human presence on that lot. The implications are significant. Someone is active in the swamp in the late 1700s, building a hidden stone structure sealed below the waterline, storing iron hardware inside it, including a crank mechanism designed to operate something larger. That person or group then vanishes from the historical record entirely. The structure sits undisturbed for a century or more before Graves ever purchases the land above it. And Graves himself dies in 1888 without leaving any documented reference to the vault buried beneath his property. I can only think that this was a place where someone stored valuables. Maybe multiple vaults could still exist in the swamp. Whoever built this structure, their name appears in no record connected to Oak Island. Nobody knows who they were. Aladdin's Cave, the underground chamber. 1 week before the swamp excavation produces these results, a separate development takes place on the other side of the island that the team cannot set aside. Representatives from Eden Technologies present the findings from 2 years of continuous data collection in the Money Pit area. 5 muon detectors, sophisticated instruments that use cosmic ray particles to image deep underground structures in the same way an X-ray images bone, have been positioned in boreholes at various depths across the Money Pit zone. Their purpose is to scan for voids, tunnels, and high-density objects at depths no conventional drill camera can document. The results arrive with a level of precision the team has not seen before. Multiple potential targets identified, multiple possible underground voids, and the indication that there may be more than one separate deposit of material buried within the Money Pit area. With this data in hand, the team moves to physically investigate a large underground cavity located at 140 to 142 feet below the surface, a feature identified in a previous season and nicknamed Aladdin's Cave. Underwater imaging expert Blaine Carr conducts a two-step operation. First, a high-definition camera is lowered to document the interior of the cavity. Second, a sonar device will be used to map its precise dimensions and identify any openings in the rock walls. The camera breaks through into the cavity, and the scale of the feature immediately exceeds expectations. The walls extend beyond the camera's field of view. A defined ledge is visible in the rock, the kind of structural feature that forms differently depending on whether the cave was shaped by water movement over millennia or by deliberate human modification over a much shorter period. As the camera tilts toward the cave floor, something in the image draws the full attention of everyone watching the feed. The shape is angular and flat, with a defined edge protruding from the layer of silt covering the bottom of the cave. It does not have the smooth, curved profile of natural rock formation. Rick Lagina, reviewing the footage, states the implication directly. There is a genuine possibility that treasure has been deposited in that location, which would provide answers to questions the team has been working toward for years. Marty Lagina reviews the same footage and reaches the same conclusion. Something could be buried in there, and critically, there may be a way to access it from inside the cave itself. The sonar map. That evening, Blaine Carr lowers a sonar device into the borehole and runs it through the night. The instrument operates at 140 feet underground inside a cavity that no person has ever physically entered, emitting pulses that return from surrounding surfaces and build a three-dimensional picture of the environment through reflected data alone. The following morning, Rick Lagina, Marty Lagina, and Craig Tester gather around the display with Blaine Carr to review what the overnight scan produced. The cavity has a significant slope, approximately 30 degrees in one direction. The practical consequence of that slope is straightforward. Anything deposited inside the cave with any weight to it has been settling toward the lowest point under gravity from the moment it was placed there. The sonar successfully maps the upper portion of the cavity in 3 dimensions, and within that data, Blaine Carr identifies something that shifts the entire direction of the investigation. There are 2 gaps in the cave wall. These gaps are not the borehole the team drilled to access the cavity. They are separate openings in the rock that exist independently of any work the current team has performed. It's not some simple kind of cave. It kind of extends out, a tendril going out. How long is just that section? It's in the 20-foot range, 20 to 30 feet. The gaps suggest that the cavity is not a sealed, self-contained space. It has openings, and those openings could be the mouths of tunnels leading further into the surrounding rock. Blaine Carr's formal assessment of the sonar data is this: The findings suggest the potential for man-made ingress into a natural cavern. In plain terms, someone may have engineered deliberate access to this cave from the side, cutting tunnels laterally through the rock rather than approaching it from directly above. The sonar's limitation in its current position is that the cave wall blocks the instrument's line of sight to the lowest portion of the cavity, the exact area where the 30-degree slope would have deposited anything of significant weight over the centuries. A second bore hole drilled 5 or 6 feet from the first would give the sonar a different angle and could finally reveal what is resting at the bottom of that slope. The floor of Aladdin's cave, the section the team most urgently needs to examine, remains hidden. The survey states, Rick Lagina is working in the northern section of the swamp on land that once belonged to Fred Nolan, the same area where the sealed stone vault was pulled from the waterline. He stops. A large wooden stake is partially submerged in the swamp floor directly beneath him, driven deep into the mud. The stake is visibly old. The cut at the tip is not a saw cut. It is the result of deliberate, repeated axe strikes, leaving a specific pattern of 4 to 5 cuts at the tip. This is precisely the description Fred Nolan and his son Tom gave repeatedly over the years when documenting the survey stakes Fred recovered from this same swamp decades earlier. Gary Drayton examines it and confirms immediately that the stake matches the description exactly. Marty Lagina and Alex Lagina both study it carefully. Alex draws attention to the difference between the upper and lower sections of the wood. The upper section, the portion that has been exposed above the waterline over time, shows significant decay and weathering. The lower section, the part that has remained submerged in the anaerobic swamp mud, where the absence of oxygen dramatically slows decomposition, looks almost intact by comparison. That contrast in preservation across a single piece of wood is itself evidence of extended time sitting in a fixed position. Marty Lagina's assessment after studying it closely: you thought there might be some wood here, some timbers. Yeah, here you go. Or some sort of cribbing. There's another layer of stone underneath this one, though. His level of skepticism about the stake's significance and age drops considerably. Fred Nolan was a professional land surveyor, not a hobbyist or an enthusiast, but a man who spent his entire career reading the evidence of organized human activity in the physical landscape. In 1969, convinced that the real answers to the Oak Island mystery lay within the swamp rather than the money pit, Nolan undertook the effort to drain it. What he found inside were multiple uniform rows of wooden stakes driven into the swamp floor in patterns that a trained surveyor would immediately recognize as deliberate and systematic. He carbon dated the samples. The result came back at approximately 1575, plus or minus 85 years, placing them firmly in the 1500s, centuries before the first documented discovery of the money pit. Nolan's professional conclusion was that the stakes were survey markers left behind by a large-scale, organized construction project. His analysis of the evidence led him to a conclusion that the Oak Island research community debated for decades, that the island was not originally a single landmass, that it had once been 2 separate islands, and that the triangle-shaped swamp between them had been deliberately engineered, deliberately flooded and filled, to join the two into a single unified island. In Nolan's assessment, the swamp is not a natural feature of the Nova Scotia coastline at all. It is constructed infrastructure built in the 1500s by a workforce operating with a specific plan and a specific goal, for reasons that no existing historical record has ever accounted for. Nolan spent the remainder of his life pursuing that conclusion. He died in 2016 without seeing it proven. The stake Rick Lagina finds in this same swamp matches every characteristic Nolan documented. If the swamp was deliberately constructed, then every significant find made within it, the sealed stone vault, the stone pathway, the iron artifacts dated to the late 1700s, and this stake consistent with those dated to the 1500s, belongs to the same underlying plan. These are not coincidences collecting in the same stretch of water. When we went to the north side of the swamp, I didn't really expect to see much, and sure enough, as the dig proceeds, there's a square vault-like thing that was submerged in the swamp. They are the physical remains of something organized, intentional, and carefully concealed across multiple centuries. What this changes: the team has recovered a sealed stone vault from the northern swamp containing iron artifacts metallurgically dated to the late 1700s, predating any documented human presence on that section of Oak Island. A deliberately constructed stone pathway leads directly to the vault. Survey stakes recovered from the same area are consistent with Fred Nolan's carbon-dated finds from the 1500s. And 140 feet underground in the Money Pit Zone, sonar data from Aladdin's cave reveals a natural cavern with what appear to be engineered access points cut laterally into the rock walls. These four findings are not the results of separate, unrelated investigations. They are connected by geography, concentrated in the same northern swamp, on the same land once owned by Graves and later by Nolan. They are connected by the internal logic of deliberate concealment. A pathway constructed to lead somewhere specific, a sealed vault at its end, and a deep underground chamber with possible engineered tunnel access beneath the Money Pit. And they are connected by time, spanning the 1500s, the late 1700s, and the mid-1800s. Three distinct eras of organized human activity on an island that conventional history has treated as undiscovered prior to the 1790s. That version of history is no longer holding together. Every find in the swamp adds pressure to it. The team is now planning a second borehole into Aladdin's cave to give the sonar a line of sight to the cave floor. Excavation in the northern swamp is continuing. The lowest section of the cave remains unmapped. The vault's full history remains unresolved. The central questions have not changed. Who built the stone vault in the swamp? Who was operating on that section of Oak Island in the late 1700s before any documented occupant? Who constructed the survey infrastructure in the 1500s? And what were they building toward? And what is resting at the bottom of Aladdin's cave 140 feet underground, inside a cavity with tunnel openings that nobody has fully mapped yet? Nobody has the complete answers yet, but the evidence is no longer theoretical. It is physical, it is dated, and it is pointing in a direction that no one who has followed this island across the last 230 years has ever been able to point before. Subscribe and stay close because the next excavation is already underway. And what lies at the bottom of that cave could be the answer this island has been holding on to for centuries.